The village lay quiet under the full moon. The only sounds were the distant hoots of an owl and the crackling of a fire. Among the villagers sat Okafor, a young man filled with ambition. He had long dreamt of a better life beyond the vast lands of his ancestors, and one fateful day, his dreams became reality. His visa to the United Kingdom had been approved. The moment his eyes scanned the letter, his heart leaped. He could already see himself walking the streets of London, far from the struggles of village life. Unable to contain his joy, he rushed to share the news with his friends. They cheered, clapped, and patted his back, their voices echoing through the village. But among them was Obinna, whose eyes held a different fire, one of envy. Though he smiled, his heart whispered words of darkness. That night, Okafor visited his grandmother. She sat by the fire, stirring a pot of soup, her grey hair wrapped neatly in a scarf. Without looking at him, she asked why his voice had been dancing through the village. When he told her the news, she let out a deep sigh. "Have I not taught you, my son, that the river does not announce itself before it floods? Not everyone who smiles with you is happy for you. Be careful." But Okafor, young and full of excitement, brushed aside her words. Days passed, and the night before his departure arrived. As he lay in bed, a shadow crept outside his window. A whisper in the wind, an unseen force slithered into his room. By morning, his body burned with fever, his head spun, and he could barely stand. His flight to the UK came and went, but he remained in his bed, trapped by an illness no one could explain. The village healer was called. He examined Okafor, threw his cowrie shells onto the ground, and his face darkened. "This sickness is not of the body, but of the spirit. Someone, somewhere, has cast you out of envy. Your words invited the storm." Okafor shivered, his grandmother's warning echoing in his mind. Rituals were performed, herbs were burned, but the sickness refused to leave. His strength faded, and whispers spread through the village. Some said it was fate. Others said it was a warning from the gods. Desperate for a cure, he journeyed to a distant town to seek the help of a powerful herbalist. The road was treacherous, the nights haunted by whispers, the days filled with shadows lurking just beyond sight. The herbalist studied him carefully, his voice solemn. "The forces against you are strong. The jealousy of a man is like a vulture, it waits for its moment. You must seek forgiveness from those you may have angered." With a heavy heart, Okafor returned home. He gathered his friends and spoke from his soul. "My brothers, if I have wronged any of you, I seek your forgiveness. I was blinded by excitement and did not realize that my words could invite trouble." Among his friends, Obinna stood silent. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Okafor understood. Obinna lowered his gaze, his voice barely above a whisper. "We all have our dreams, my brother. But sometimes, a man must protect his own path." That night, the fever broke. Whether it was the apology or the spirits relenting, no one knew. But Okafor had learned his lesson. The days stretched into weeks, and Okafor's strength slowly returned, but his spirit had changed. He no longer rushed to speak his mind, and he no longer believed that good news had to be shared with everyone. He took long walks through the village, observing how nature kept its secrets. The trees did not announce when they would bear fruit, and the river did not tell when it would swell. Everything happened in its time, in silence. Months passed, and one day, a new letter arrived. A relative overseas, hearing of his misfortune, arranged for another visa. This time, Okafor told no one. He packed his bags in silence, left before the sun rose, and when the village woke, his heart was empty. But this time, his journey was different. As he boarded the plane, he felt lighter, as if he had left behind a burden. The sickness had been a lesson, a reminder that words have power, and not all ears are meant to hear them. As the plane took off, he whispered a quiet prayer, not for success, but for wisdom. Back in the village, his grandmother sat outside, a knowing smile on her lips. She had watched the world long enough to know that silence carried the greatest strength. A river that flows silently reaches the ocean without disturbance. And so, everyone, remember the lesson of Okafor. Not every blessing must be announced, and not every ear that listens is a friend. The spirits watch, and the envious lurk in the shadows. Guard your words, for they shape your fate.